Thank you. Well, I am somewhat surprised. I am, s- I am somewhat surprised that my talk was scheduled for this section because it has not no direct relation to CP, and but anyway, to some degree. Okay, I will speak on the role of personality resources in physically disabled students of different etiologies facing the adjustment challenge, and I would like first to show you this picture because I represent actually Moscow Higher School of Economics, but this study was made a few years ago at Moscow State University for Psychology and Education. There is an Institute of the Problems of Integrative Education there, and the Laboratory of Personality Development of the Physically Disabled existed there for 3 years. And at that time, we had a unique possibility of studying and comparing the physically disabled and conditionally healthy, so we called them students in their late teens that studied in an inclusive setting at college level and university level at IT department of that university, and over 400 students investigated through those years before this laboratory was closed. And we still keep analyzing and publishing those data that are not yet fully published. So the aim of this study, well, you know that special physical disabilities, that is deficiency of bodily resources, do not necessarily result in maladjustment or in lowering of quality of life. You know, the first presentation today spoke that there were said that there were no differences in meaning of life. Well, and it's confirmed by some other studies. It can be compensated by social and personality resources. We hypothesize that the possession of personality resources is more predictive of well-being than the challenges of psychological adjustment, and we tried to, we're based on personality-focused rather than disability-focused approach, and I will not dwell long on the theoretical models, theoretical background. I have no time for this. Some of the ideas that made the basis of our approach was Alfred Adler's idea of compensation of organic deficits by other resources, Nikolai Bernstein's idea of functional organs involving both bodily and mental structures that can compensate for purely physical deficits, Lev Vygotsky's idea of transformation of socially shared activities into individual ones, and Martin Seligman's idea of the buffering function of personality strength regarding life adversities. And basing on this, I have elaborated a hamper personality development model that is neither normal nor abnormal developmental path. Developmental tasks in this case, they don't differ from what we usually call normal development. So bodily resources are deficitary but compensatory redistribution to macrosocial, and personality resources makes this trajectory quite balanced and reasonable, and challenges in this case are the same as in what we call normal development. Stakes are higher and resources are permanently mobilized. This is the special feature of this developmental trajectory, and this entails both risks and opportunities. So the main idea was that physical disability is not equal to maladjustment, and the latter is not equal to low resources. We expected that personality resources would mediate the relationship between disability and maladjustment. Well, so the classification of resources, some scholars call them assets, that's what makes difference for goal attainment. Well, including several groups of resources, bodily resources, our body and everything that is related to its social resources that can be classified to macrosocial resources, that is social and institutional ones, the political and the legal regulations and attitudes, and the creation of supporting environment and all this that works for everyone, for all members of this group, and microsocial or interpersonal resources that refer to interpersonal situation of every special single person. Well, and besides, we have personality resources like character strength, values and meaning, attitudes, So the resources that every person possesses independent of the social environment, and the deficit of bodily resources, as it is the case in physical disability, can be compensated by other types of resources, and deficit of social resources can be compensated finally by personality resources. So I will present just one piece of that data we collected during that time, so you know that it's not, over 400 students if we are working with physically disabled students. It's not just, it doesn't work just to give them a set of inventors and then to collect them back. It's a very complicated work. Every researcher should sit together with them, phrasing the equation and writing the answer. So just a very long story, so a huge work is behind all this. So this study, based on the sample of 210 college and university students studying in inclusive settings, 48 of them physically disabled and 164 conditionally healthy, because there are no healthy individuals at all. Everyone has some problems, some limitations. Well, just the point is that the differences in their records. So they don't have disability records, and we offer them a battery of personality tests, including the measures of maladjustment, that means the brief version of MMPI, and quite a number of personality variables referring to quality of life and meaning of life, and some number of hardiness and ambiguity tolerance, self-efficacy, mindfulness, social support, coping strategies, post-traumatic growth, and quite a lot. And we also used an aggregate measure of personality resources. Some of the variables selected, they were highly correlated with each other and integrated into a common scale of aggregate personality resources. Okay, first, does health status make much difference? No, it doesn't. Here is the list of variables and the measures of differences between the disabled and non-disabled participants, and only in a few cases it reached some acceptable level of significance. For most of the variables, there are no significant difference between both samples. So, in fact, we have only 3 significant differences in tolerance for ambiguity. That is lower in disabled sample, because it's quite understandable, because they have too much ambiguity, too much uncertainty, and it's difficult for that. Every simple action contains a lot of uncertainty, so they are not much tolerant to it. Well, and a couple of two coping strategies are higher in disabled sample. That says that they elaborate also some spatial resources. Not only some resources are lacking, but some psychological resources are developed in their situation. Second point of results, does maladjustment make much difference? So maladjustment measured by the strain of adaptation mechanisms, MMPI scales, so whether there are some scales that exceed 70 T scores, that is usually accepted as the measure of strain of adaptation mechanisms, or the profile is within these limits. You see also very few, you see that health status and maladjustment, their interaction also doesn't make much difference, because very few scales provide significant differences, but you see very interesting interaction on the several of those few scales. That is the measure of hardness, the important variable that explains explains the resistance to stress, the capacity of resistance to stress, and the question about the perceived opportunities. So it seems that health status produces opposite effects to maladjustment. That means that in case of normally adjusted participants, non-disabled, are higher on those measures, and the situation is absolutely different in case of maladjustment. Maladjustment tends to level the differences between the health status groups. So a very interesting table results on the interaction between aggregate resources and maladjustment. You see that in non-disabled sample, on many scales, on many MMPI scales, there is a significant negative correlation that is to be expected between the aggregate resources and the score on this scale, but this is not reproduced in the disabled sample. There is no relationship between personality resources and maladjustment signs and strain of adjustment mechanisms. So the next two results, okay, 1 minute.
1 minute.
To complete it. The next the results refers to whether health status makes difference on the resources. You see that in those two tables show that in non-disabled sample, resources and maladjustment make much more difference than in the disabled sample. So in the disabled sample, maladjustment plays essentially no role, and I will skip this slide on post-traumatic growth. A summary of results is the following. The health status, that is physical disability, maladjustment, that is strained adjustment mechanisms, and lack of personality resources are three absolutely different things. They interact rather than covariate and should be considered separately. Health status per se makes not much difference in an inclusive setting because we compare the participants that has no other differences except for their health status. Most of personality resources are not impaired in physically disabled as compared to conditionally healthy respondents, and the share of participants with, the degree of strain of adjustment mechanisms in the disabled participants makes no difference for the functioning of personality resources, unlike in non-disabled participants. Well, and personality resources mediate the impact of health status and maladjustment, especially in the disabled students. So thank you for your attention. Quite a lot of important consequences follow from this study.